Welcome to Books and Bites. Today we're going to be, well, diving deep into a book that's pretty challenging, even for, people who are into philosophy already.
Yeah, it's not an easy one.
No. But it's definitely worth it. The book is The World is Will and Representation by Arthur Schopenhauer.
And, it was published way back in 1818, I think. But even though it's that old, it still has a lot to say to people today.
Right. I mean, it grapples with some really fundamental questions about reality, our place in it, and like even the nature of happiness.
Yeah, and how we experience the world around us.
Exactly. So one of the key things Schopenhauer argues is that there are these, well, kind of two ways of understanding the world.
Yeah, he talks about the world as representation.
Right, which is, essentially the world as we perceive it through our senses, and then there's the world as will.
Yeah, and that's the deeper level, the underlying force driving all of existence, really.
Yeah, so maybe we should start with world as representation because, that's probably what we're all most familiar with.
Sure. Yeah. Schopenhauer was really building on the ideas of Immanuel Kant here.
Right.
And basically what he said is that this world that we experience is essentially a mental construct.
Okay.
It's shaped by our senses, our intellect. It's not that the external world doesn't exist, but rather that our experience of it is filtered through our own mind,
So it's kind of like watching a movie, right?
Yeah.
We see the images projected on the screen, but we're not experiencing the film reel itself, directly.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. The world we perceive is a representation,
right?
Not necessarily a perfect reflection of some ultimate reality. And Schopenhauer outlined like 4 key principles that structure this experience.
Okay.
The principle of sufficient reason, space and time, causality, and subjectivity.
Okay, well, let's break those down a little bit. So the principle of sufficient reason, that means like everything has a cause, right? Or a reason for being the way it is.
Exactly.
Like when you think about how you make decisions, you weigh the pros and cons, you consider the potential outcomes. That's that principle at work.
Exactly. That's how we understand the world.
Right. And then we have space and time, which are kind of, like the fundamental forms of our perception.
Yeah, the framework for our experiences. Like, try and describe an event without any reference to where or when it happened.
Right.
It would be impossible.
Yeah, it would. Okay, and then next you have causality, which is basically like, the idea that events are linked in a chain of cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right. So actions have consequences and things don't just, happen randomly.
Right. And that's how we make sense of things.
Right.
How we understand the world around us.
And finally, we have subjectivity, which basically means each person's experience is unique, right?
Yeah, it's shaped by their own individual mental faculties,
Right.
Their life history, their experiences, all of that. And so it means there's not like a single objective truth,
Right.
but rather, a multitude of perspectives.
So we're all, essentially living in our own little worlds shaped by our own perceptions.
Yeah, in a way.
But this is just one side of Schopenhauer's picture, right?
Right.
There's this whole other level of reality he calls the world as will.
Yeah, and this will, it's not, the kind of conscious will that we experience as humans.
Okay.
This is a blind, relentless force that drives all of existence forward. Like you can see it in the growth of plants, the movement of the stars, even the seemingly random chaos of the universe. It's this constant striving, a never-ending push for something more.
So to clarify, how does this will differ from Kant's idea of the noumenon or the thing in itself, which Kant said was ultimately unknowable?
Yeah, that's a key difference. For Kant, the noumenon was completely beyond our grasp.
Okay.
Schopenhauer, on the other hand, believed that we could experience the will directly through our own inner drives and desires.
Okay, that's fascinating because it suggests that we as humans, we have a unique window into this universal force that shapes everything. It's not, something abstract, distant.
Right.
But it's something we can feel and experience within ourselves.
Exactly. We are both subjects of the will. and expressions of it.
Okay.
And this brings us to one of Schopenhauer's most uh, profound and perhaps unsettling insights. This insatiable will, this constant striving, is actually the root of human suffering.
That's a pretty heavy thought. So why does he believe that the very force that drives life is also the source of our pain?
Well, because the will, by its very nature, is never satisfied. It's always striving for something more. It creates this perpetual cycle of desire, fleeting satisfaction, boredom, and then, new desires arriving.
So it's like that feeling when you finally achieve a long-sought goal. There's that moment of satisfaction, but then it fades so quickly.
Right.
And you're left wanting more.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer, he used vivid imagery to describe this.
Right.
He compared the will to a wheel that turns and turns without ever, reaching its destination.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty powerful image. And I think we see this idea of the will's, insatiable nature playing out in so many areas of life, from, the pursuit of wealth to the constant bombardment of advertising that fuels our desires for things we don't even need.
Yeah.
It's like we're caught in this never-ending cycle of wanting.
It is quite bleak. But Schopenhauer wasn't, all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
He did offer some potential paths to alleviate suffering, at least temporarily. And we'll explore those, in the next part of our dive.
Okay. Definitely intrigued to hear what he proposed. So for our listeners, stay tuned for part 2 of our exploration into Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive into Schopenhauer, The World as Will and Representation. We were just talking about, how this force that drives everything, this will, it's also the root of suffering.
Yeah, it's not exactly a cheerful outlook, but Schopenhauer did offer some ideas about ways to kind of escape from this constant striving, at least for a while. And one of those was art.
Okay, art as a refuge from suffering. That's an idea I think a lot of people can connect with.
Yeah, I think so too. He believed that art, and especially music, could kind of lift us out of that endless cycle of desire and allow us to, just contemplate things, without all that baggage.
So when we get lost in a great painting or a piece of music that moves us, we're kind of stepping outside of ourselves.
Right. We're not so focused on our own, little wants and worries. We can connect with something bigger.
That makes sense. And Schopenhauer, he actually saw music as the highest form of art, didn't he?
He did, yeah, because he believed it could speak directly to the will.
Okay.
Unlike painting or sculpture, which show us, specific things, music, it taps into a deeper level, like a more universal experience.
So we're not just, seeing a representation of something. We're connecting with the force itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And Schopenhauer thought that this connection, through music, it could give us a glimpse of something transcendent, something beyond, our own individual struggles.
That's a really beautiful idea. But I got to say, I don't spend all my time at the symphony or the art museum. So what about the rest of life? Are we just stuck with this constant suffering?
Well, Schopenhauer did have another idea about how to find some peace, and it might surprise you considering how much he taught about the will being, this selfish force. He actually thought compassion was key.
Compassion, really?
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but he thought that, if we understand that everyone is driven by this same will, then we can start to see ourselves in them and feel empathy for their struggles.
So it's not about, seeing each other as separate individuals all competing against each other.
Right.
But recognizing that we're all connected by this force.
Exactly. And that's where compassion comes from. It's about understanding that their desires, their suffering, it's a reflection of our own.
That's a powerful idea. And I think it's especially relevant today, in a world that often feels so divided. But, even with art and compassion, life is still going to be tough sometimes. So did Schopenhauer have any other advice for finding, more lasting peace?
He did. He believed that the most effective way to overcome suffering was through the denial of the will.
Okay, the denial of the will. So what does that aid to look like? I mean, in practice.
Well, it basically means, turning away from those worldly desires, the things that most people strive for. Wealth, power, fame, even pleasure. It's about understanding that those things, they don't really bring lasting happiness. And choosing a simpler path, a path of detachment.
So are we talking about like, asceticism, like monks living in caves, denying themselves everything?
It can be that extreme, yeah. But Schopenhauer also recognized that most people can't, just renounce everything. But we can still try to quiet those desires, find ways to detach from that endless cycle of wanting.
So things like practicing mindfulness, simplifying our lives, finding contentment in simple things. These are all kind of in line with Schopenhauer's thinking.
Exactly, yeah. They're all about finding that inner peace, learning to experience the world without being, completely consumed by our own needs and wants.
Well, Schopenhauer's ideas, they're definitely challenging, but they're also incredibly insightful, and I think we've covered a lot of ground here. But I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on how his philosophy can be relevant to us today?
Well, I think one of the biggest things Schopenhauer offers us is just his honesty about suffering, about the human condition. He doesn't try to pretend it's not there, but he also shows us that there are ways to find meaning, to find peace, whether it's through art or compassion or some degree of self-denial. He encourages us to really engage with the world in a more conscious way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like, even though his philosophy might seem, kind of pessimistic at first,
Yeah.
there's also a lot of hope there and wisdom.
Right. He's not saying give up. He's saying, face the hard truths, but then, find your own path.
Exactly. So much to think about with this book, huh?
It really is. It's one of those books that kind of stays with you, even after you put it down.
For sure. So before we wrap up, let's maybe try to sum up, the main things we've talked about.
Yeah, sounds good.
So we started by, looking at this idea of Schopenhauer's about the two worlds. The world is representation, which is how we experience things through our senses, and the world is will, which is that deeper, that driving force behind everything.
Right. And we spend some time talking about the will itself, how it's never really satisfied, always striving, always wanting more, and how, according to Schopenhauer, that's actually the root of a lot of our suffering.
Yeah, that idea that we're always kind of chasing after the next thing, and it never quite, lives up to the expectation.
Exactly.
But we also talked about some ways to kind of find some relief from that, at least for a while. Like Schopenhauer saw art, especially music, as a way to sort of step outside of that cycle.
Mm-hmm. To just be present in the moment and connect with something larger than ourselves.
And then we talked about compassion, which is, recognizing that everyone's kind of in the same boat, that we're all driven by this same will.
Right, and that can help us to be more understanding, more forgiving.
Exactly. And then finally, for those who are, really seeking a more permanent kind of peace, Schopenhauer suggested the denial of the will, which means kind of turning away from those worldly desires, finding contentment in simplicity.
Yeah. It's not an easy path, but it's definitely a powerful idea.
For sure. And of course, we've just barely scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore in Schopenhauer's work. But I don't know, for me, one of the things that really stuck with me is just how honest he is about the human experience. He doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
Yeah, he really doesn't. But there's also this sense of hope, like even though life is hard, even though there's suffering, there are also ways to find meaning, to find joy.
And to find peace. Well said. Well, if you're interested in diving deeper into Schopenhauer's thought-provoking world, we highly recommend picking up a copy of The World, as Will and Representation. You can find a link to the book in the description. And be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more engaging explorations of powerful books. Until next time, happy reading.